The triumvirate administrative council chamber existed in that peculiar state of architectural grandeur that only species with too much time and an alarming deficit of self-awareness could achieve. Carved from a single asteroid and polished to mirror brightness, it floated serenely in the Nexus system's third orbital ring, a testament to what happens when you give bureaucrats unlimited budgets and a pathological need to impress visitors who'd rather be anywhere else. Inside this monument to administrative excess, the morning session proceeded with the soul-crushing predictability of entropy itself. The Vorthan delegate had been droning about mineral extraction protocols for precisely 47 minutes, a fact that would have impressed no one if anyone had been keeping track, which they weren't, because consciousness had long since fled the chamber like refugees from a particularly tedious war. High Administrator Gethmar of the crystalline hegemony presided from the central dais, his translucent form refracting the chamber's ambient lighting into patterns that might have been beautiful if they weren't attached to such a spectacularly boring personality. To his left, Administrator Nexsil of the Hive Confederation buzzed occasionally. Whether from communication with the collective or simple frustration with the proceedings remained delightfully unclear. The third member of the triumvirate, Administrator Yeldrin of the Ethereal Concordat, maintained what his species called meditative silence, but what everyone else recognized as the diplomatic equivalent of a nap. His gossamer form barely registered against his floating chair, wavering like heat shimmer over summer pavement. Therefore, subsection 47 alpha clearly indicates that the proper filing procedure requires. The Vorthan's melodious voice possessed all the charm of a plasma cutter through steel plate. It was precisely at this moment, when the universe's collective will to live had reached its absolute nadir, that the chamber's main entrance dilated with a sound like wet leather being stretched. The soft whoosh that followed carried with it something the council rarely encountered: the promise of actual consequences. The human stepped through with the casual confidence of someone who'd never learned that doorways in government buildings were meant to inspire reverence, not convenience. She wore what her species called business attire, a concept that had caused no small amount of confusion among races who conducted commerce through pheromone exchange or crystalline resonance pattern. The dark fabric appeared practical rather than ceremonial, which immediately marked her as either refreshingly honest or dangerously unaware of proper protocol. Probably both. She paused just inside the threshold, surveying the chamber with the expression of someone calculating square footage for tax purposes. Her gaze lingered on the ornate ceiling murals depicting the council's glorious founding scenes of various species joining hands, tentacles and assorted appendages in universal harmony. The slight upturn of her mouth suggested she found the artistic interpretation optimistic. High Administrator Gethmar's voice cut through the chamber like crystal chimes through silence. Our irregular appointment has arrived. The word irregular carried enough diplomatic weight to crush a small moon. In council parlance, it meant approximately 17 different types of procedural violations, each more grave than the last. The human seemed unimpressed by the semantic artillery. Traffic was murder, she replied, settling into the designated respondent's chair without waiting for formal invitation. The chair, designed to accommodate the physiological requirements of 14 different species, made a sound like confused machinery as it attempted to calibrate itself for human proportions. Hope I didn't miss anything important. The silence that followed possessed the quality of vacuum, absolute, profound, and slightly hostile to organic life. Administrator Nexilo's buzzing increased in frequency, climbing toward what behavioral specialists recognized as the hive equivalent of apoplectic rage. His compound eyes swiveled to focus on the human with the intensity typically reserved for existential threats or expired lunch items. The council, he managed, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested several thousand individuals speaking in barely controlled unison, operates according to established protocols that have maintained galactic stability for over 6 standard millennia. These protocols exist for reasons that, let me guess. The human interrupted with the casual brutality of someone swatting a fly. They prevent people from asking uncomfortable questions during your little morning coffee clutch. The term coffee clutch required immediate translation by the chamber's linguistic processors, which produced results ranging from informal beverage gathering to ritualized caffeine consumption ceremony. None of the translations captured the subtle derision embedded in the human's tone, though several council members suspected they were being mocked in ways their universal translators couldn't properly convey. High Administrator Gethmar's crystalline form shifted through several color spectrums, a display that in his species, indicated either deep contemplation or the early stages of explosive decompression. Given the circumstances, smart money was on the latter. Representative of Earth, he began, invoking her formal title with the reverence typically reserved for toxic waste disposal. Your presence here today represents a deviation from standard procedure. The Council's morning sessions are intended for administrative review, not. The human leaned back in her chair, which gave up trying to accommodate her, and settled for a compromise that satisfied no one. Not for dealing with the mess you've been making of things for the past few decades. This statement landed in the chamber like a meteor in a garden party. The Vorthan delegate stopped mid-sentence about filing procedures, his melodious voice trailing off into stunned silence. Administrator Yildren's gossamer form solidified slightly, a sure sign that his meditative state had been thoroughly disrupted. The human continued with the relentless cheerfulness of someone delivering excellent news about a terminal diagnosis. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been doing a spectacular job of ignoring every single crisis that doesn't fit neatly into your precious protocol. But hey, don't let me interrupt the important work of, what was it again, mineral extraction forms. She glanced toward the Vorthan delegate with mock curiosity. Those must be some absolutely fascinating forms. The chamber's environmental systems hummed louder, working overtime to process the sudden spike in stress pheromones, electromagnetic fluctuations, and what the sensors diplomatically classified as elevated emotional discharge. The air itself seemed to thicken with the weight of bureaucratic outrage meeting human indifference. High Administrator Gethmar's form had progressed through the visible spectrum, and was now exploring ultraviolet ranges that hurt to look at. The protocols exist, he said with the careful enunciation of someone explaining fire safety to pyromaniacs, to ensure that all voices are heard through proper channels. That due consideration is given to. Right, the human said, nodding with theatrical understanding. Proper channel, like the 17 different committees I had to petition just to get 5 minutes of your time. The same committees that have been reviewing humanity's membership application for 8 years now. She paused, consulting a small device that beeped cheerfully. 8 years, 4 months and 16 days to be precise. But who's counting? The silence that followed carried with it the distinct impression that the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what catastrophic breakdown of diplomatic norms would occur next. It wouldn't have to wait long. The human's casual mention of 8 years, 4 months and 16 days hung in the air like a particularly malodorous gas leak, impossible to ignore, and growing more toxic by the second. The council members exchanged the sort of glances typically reserved for moments when someone discovers the safety protocols were more like gentle suggestions. Administrator Nexthal's buzzing had reached frequencies that made the chamber's structural supports vibrate sympathetic. The review process, he began, his collective voice carrying undertones of defensive bureaucratic panic, requires thorough evaluation of candidate species according to established criteria that ensure galactic harmony, and galactic harmony. The human rolled the words around like wine she was considering spitting out. Is that what you call the hegemony's strip mining operation in the outer rim? Because from the reports I've been reading, harmony seems like an interesting word choice for what amounts to ecological devastation on an unprecedented scale. High Administrator Gethmar's crystalline form flickered, a nervous tick that his species had tried unsuccessfully to breed out for millennia. The crystalline hegemony's expansion projects operate within all applicable environmental protection standards. The human's interruption carried the surgical precision of someone performing an autopsy on a still-living patient. Standards that coincidentally allow unlimited resource extraction as long as you file the proper paperwork afterward. Funny how that worked. She reached into her jacket, a motion that caused 3 different security systems to activate and immediately deactivate when they registered no weapons. Just more of those bewildering human documents. I've got the reports right here if anyone's interested. 17 systems completely stripped of mineral resources. 43 billion sentient beings relocated to temporary housing that's been temporary for decades now, and a carbon footprint that's literally visible from neighboring galaxies. The Vorthan delegate made a sound like wind chimes having an existential crisis. The relocation programs provide adequate compensation and cultural preservation opportunities. Cultural preservation. The human's laugh contained about as much warmth as interstellar space. You mean the theme parks? The little reservations where displaced populations can perform traditional dances for tourist credits while their actual homeworlds get processed into luxury building material. Administrator Yildran's gossamer form rippled, a sign that even his legendarily detached species was beginning to feel uncomfortable. The preservation initiatives serve important cultural heritage functions while allowing for necessary economic development. Necessary for who? The human leaned forward, and somehow the simple gesture made the entire chamber feel smaller. Because last I checked, the only species getting rich off this necessary economic development are the ones sitting in this room. She gestured broadly at the chamber's opulent surrounding. This little asteroid palace didn't pay for itself, did it? All that carved stone, the mirror polish, the environmental systems that could probably support a small city, that all came from somewhere. Or rather someone. High Administrator Gethmar's color spectrum had progressed beyond ultraviolet into ranges that existed primarily as theoretical concepts. The Council's administrative facilities are funded through standard taxation and resource allocation procedures that coincidentally exempt Council members from paying into while maximizing contributions from non-member species. The human consulted her device again, its cheerful beeping a jarring counterpoint to the chamber's increasingly oppressive atmosphere. Species like humanity, who've been contributing to your Galactic Stability Fund for 8 years while being denied voting rights, representation, or apparently even basic courtesy. The silence that followed possessed the quality of a held breath before impact. Administrator Nexthal's buzzing had become so intense that several chamber fixtures began resonating in harmony, a deeply unsettling sound that suggested either mechanical failure or the universe's attempt at death metal. The contributions, he managed, ensure that candidate species demonstrate commitment to galactic community values while their applications undergo proper review. The humans savored the word like poison honey. The same review process that somehow fast-tracked the Void Syndicate's membership in 6 months, despite their charming habit of harvesting sentient brains for processing power. This statement landed like a precision-guided missile in a fireworks factory. The Vorthan delegate's melodious voice cracked completely, producing sounds that the translation matrix rendered as untranslatable distress. Administrator Yildran's form became so agitated, it began phasing in and out of visible spectra. The Syndicate's application involved unique circumstances that required expedited consideration, due to strategic necessity. High Administrator Gethmar's attempt at explanation sounded like crystal breaking in slow motion. Strategic necessity. The human nodded with the understanding of someone who'd just solved a particularly difficult puzzle. Also known as they threatened to turn your homeworlds into computational substrates if you didn't let them join the club. Must have been quite the diplomatic challenge. She stood, and the motion carried with it the implication that the real entertainment was just beginning. So let me see if I understand the Council's position correctly. Humanity gets 8 years of bureaucratic runaround while funding your operations, but brain-harvesting cyborgs get the express lane because they asked nicely with orbital weapons platform. The chamber's environmental systems gave up entirely, producing a low whine that sounded suspiciously like electronic crying. It was at this moment of supreme bureaucratic meltdown, when 3 different species were simultaneously questioning their life choices, and the chamber's air recycling system was having what could charitably be called a nervous breakdown, that a voice emerged from the shadows behind administrative days. "Excuse me," said the voice, carrying the dusty authority of someone who'd been filing documents since before most civilizations had invented writing. "Might I request permission to document these proceedings?" Every head, appendage, and sensory organ in the chamber swiveled toward the source of this unprecedented interruption. In the alcove reserved for council record-keepers sat an ancient being whose species had been cataloging galactic bureaucracy since the first administrator had learned to stamp forms in triplicate. His form resembled what would happen if someone crossed a praying mantis with a filing cabinet and then left it in a library for several geological ages. High Administrator Gethmar's crystalline structure made a sound like wind chimes being fed through a wood chipper. Archivist Heldar, the Council's recording procedures are all ready. Oh, I'm not talking about the standard minutes. the ancient scribe interrupted with the casual disregard for authority that came from having outlived several galactic civilizations. Those barely qualify as historical fiction. I mean actual documentation. The kind that captures what's really happening here. His compound eyes fixed on the human representative with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered a new species of fascinating catastrophe. I've been recording council sessions for 47,000 standard years, and I can honestly say I've never heard anyone speak to administrators quite like this. It's refreshing. The human turned toward the scribe with the first genuine smile she'd displayed since arriving. By all means, document away. Though I should warn you, I'm just getting started. Administrator Nexthal's buzzing reached frequencies that made nearby coffee cups vibrate off their saucers. Archivist. The Council's privacy protocols clearly state that sensitive discussions require privacy protocols. Helmdar's mandibles clicked in what his species used to indicate amusement. You mean the same protocols that allow you to broadcast your glorious achievements across the galaxy while classifying anything embarrassing as administrative privilege? The ancient being's recording apparatus, a device that looked like someone had crossed a typewriter with a small galaxy, hummed to life with obvious enthusiasm. Please, representative of Earth, continue. You mentioned the Void Syndicate's expedited membership process. The human's grin widened, and somehow the expression made the chamber's temperature drop several degrees. Oh, that's just the beginning. The syndicate's application was rushed through faster than food poisoning, but it gets better. Would the council like to explain their recent trade agreements with the parasitic collective? High Administrator Gethmar's form had progressed beyond visible light entirely, existing now primarily as a very distressed radio signal. The collective's biotechnology contributions provide significant medical advantages that benefit all member species. Medical advantages. The human's voice carried the warm appreciation of someone who'd just been handed premium ammunition. Is that what you call weaponized plague research? Because the reports I've seen suggest their medical contributions include 17 different strains of consciousness-eating bacteria, and something called a neural dissolution matrix that sounds absolutely delightful. Archivist Helmdar's recording device began producing sounds of pure mechanical joy, clicks, whirs, and beeps that suggested it was having the time of its theoretical life. Fascinating, the ancient scribe murmured, and the council approved these research projects. Approved? The human laughed with the sound of someone watching a particularly absurd tragedy. They funded them. Apparently there's nothing quite like the potential for biological warfare to expedite the bureaucratic process. The collective went from first contact to full membership in 4 months. Administrator Yildren's gossamer form was now fluctuating so rapidly it resembled a very anxious strobe light. The research applications were clearly labeled as defensive in nature, intended to protect member species from what? Excessive conscious, because that seems to be the only thing their defensive research is designed to eliminate. The human turned back to the scribe, whose recording apparatus was now glowing with what could only be described as professional ecstasy. Make sure you get this part down, Archivist. The same council that spent 8 years questioning humanity's commitment to galactic harmony, fast-tracked membership for a species whose idea of medicine involves eating people's minds. Helmdar's mandibles clicked rapidly, his species equivalent of applause. Oh, this is going directly into the permanent archives. Future civilizations will find this absolutely riveting. Future civilizations might also wonder. The human continued with the relentless cheerfulness of someone conducting a friendly autopsy. How the council justified their exclusive trade agreements with the entropy cult. The silence that followed possessed the quality of a singularity. Dense, dark, and capable of crushing normal matter into exotic states of panic. The mention of the entropy cult had apparently crossed some invisible line from embarrassing diplomatic incident into existential crisis requiring immediate damage control. High Administrator Gethmar's crystalline form began cycling through colors that didn't technically exist in normal space-time, while Administrator Nexthal's buzzing reached frequencies that made nearby planets file noise complaint. The cult's philosophical contributions to galactic discourse provide valuable perspectives on universal constants and thermodynamic inevitabilities. Administrator Yildren's attempt at explanation sounded like someone trying to sell life insurance to a black hole. Philosophical contributions. The humans savored each syllable like fine wine paired with the destruction of civilizations. Is that what you call their plan to accelerate universal heat death by approximately 14 billion years? Because their research proposals read more like cosmic suicide notes than philosophy papers. Archivist Helndar's recording apparatus had begun producing harmonics, complex musical arrangements that suggested it was composing an epic poem in real time. Please tell me there are more trade agreements, the ancient scribe said with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new form of recreational mathematics. Oh, there are always more trade agreements. The human reached into her jacket again, producing documents that seemed to multiply like bureaucratic rabbits. The Nihilistic Federation's exclusive mining rights to inhabited star systems, the Despair Syndicate's emotional harvesting licenses, and my personal favorite, the Time Vandals' temporal manipulation permits. She held up a document that seemed to hurt reality just by existing. This little gem allows them to retroactively edit galactic history for administrative convenience. Apparently, it's much easier to govern when you can simply delete inconvenient facts from the timeline. High Administrator Gethmar made a sound like crystal singing its own funeral dirge. The temporal adjustment protocols serve important historical accuracy functions by correcting clerical errors. And correcting clerical errors. The human's laughter contained enough irony to build a small spacecraft. Like the clerical error that removed the Pacifist Alliance from historical records after they objected to your expansion policies, or the accuracy correction that transformed the refugee crisis of Sector 7 into a voluntary relocation celebration. The chamber's structural integrity began showing signs of strain, not from any physical force but from the sheer weight of accumulated bureaucratic shame, pressing down on the architecture itself. Several decorative elements spontaneously developed stress fractures, as if the building was trying to escape through dimensional collapse. Administrator Nexthol's collective voice had deteriorated into what sounded like 1,000 individuals arguing simultaneously while drowning in maple syrup. The historical revision protocols ensure that official records maintain consistency with current policy objectives, and do not create unnecessary confusion among people who might wonder why their friends and families keep disappearing from official existence. The human interrupted with the surgical precision of someone performing brain surgery with a chainsaw. Must be quite the administrative challenge, keeping track of which civilizations you've decided never existed. Archivist Helndar's mandibles were now clicking so rapidly they'd achieved a state approaching percussion music. This is unprecedented, he muttered, his recording device glowing like a small sun with pure archival ecstasy. 47,000 years of documentation, and I've never recorded an actual breakdown of institutional credibility in real time. It's magnificent. The human turned toward the scribe with an expression of fond appreciation. Archivist, you've been documenting these proceedings for millennia. In your professional opinion, how would you characterize the Council's approach to galactic governance? Helndar's compound eyes swiveled between the human and the increasingly distressed administrators, his ancient form practically vibrating with the joy of someone finally allowed to tell the truth. Well, Representative, if I were to summarize 47,000 years of observation into a single assessment, he paused dramatically, savoring the moment like vintage wine, I would characterize it as impressively consistent in competence, elevated to the level of performance art. The sound that emerged from the three administrators simultaneously defied classification by conventional physics. It contained elements of anguish, disbelief, and what appeared to be the collective realization that their careers had just achieved a state of quantum death, simultaneously over and not over until observed by future historians. Performance art, the human repeated with obvious delight. That's perfect. I especially appreciate the artistic vision behind your refugee policies. Creating suffering on such a massive scale while maintaining plausible deniability requires real creative genius. She consulted her device one final time, its cheerful beeping now sounding like a countdown to bureaucratic apocalypse. Speaking of refugees, the Council might be interested to know that humanity has been quietly relocating and rehabilitating the populations you've been displacing. Funny thing about humans, we have this peculiar habit of helping people instead of processing them into statistical abstractions. High Administrator Gethmar's form had achieved a state of chromatic impossibility that hurt to look at, and probably violated several laws of unauthorized intervention in council population management policies, constitutes a severe breach of what? The same galactic law that doesn't recognize our membership but still demands our compliance. The human stood, and the gesture carried with it the weight of species speaking truth to power across the cosmos. The same legal framework that classifies entire civilizations as administrative inconveniences, while treating corporate profit margins as fundamental rights. She moved toward the chamber's exit with the casual confidence of someone who just won a war without bothering to declare it. Here's the thing about humans, administrators, we've been dealing with corrupt bureaucracies since we invented agriculture. You're not the first group of self-important officials to mistake procedure for morality, and you probably won't be the last. Archivist Helndar's recording device was now producing sounds that approached musical transcendence, complex harmonies that suggested the universe itself was applauding. Representative, will you be returning for future sessions? The human paused at the threshold, her smile containing enough dangerous amusement to power a small star. Oh, I'll be back. Turns out humanity's really good at persist. Something about evolving on a planet that actively tried to kill us for millions of years gives you a certain perspective on adversity. She gestured broadly at the chamber's opulent surroundings. Enjoy your palace, administrator. The bills are going to come due eventually, and when they do, you'll discover that the species you've been exploiting have excellent memories, and very little patience for administrative explanations. The entrance dilated behind her, sealing with a sound like the universe sighing in relief. The silence that followed possessed qualities that defied conventional description. It was the silence of chickens coming home to roost, of bills arriving past due, of bureaucratic hubris meeting inevitable consequence. It was the silence of institutions realizing they'd been weighed, measured, and found hilariously wanting by a species they'd dismissed as irrelevant. Archivist Helndar continued recording, his ancient apparatus humming with satisfaction as it documented the administrator's collective, existential crisis. After 47,000 years of bureaucratic doublespeak, he'd finally witnessed something worth preserving. The moment when truth met power and power discovered it was significantly overrated. Well, he said to the chamber at large, his mandibles clicking with profound contentment, that's definitely going in the permanent collection. Outside, in the vast emptiness of space, the human's transport vessel departed with the casual efficiency of someone who'd accomplished exactly what they'd intended. Behind them, the council's magnificent asteroid palace continued its stately orbit, still beautiful, still impressive, and now permanently documented as a monument to the galaxy's most spectacular case of institutional self-destruction. Some victories, it turned out, were worth writing down.